Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's truly an honor and a privilege to have Chairman Art Torres in our show tonight. Chairman Art Torres has led the California Democratic Party since 1996. His leadership of the California Democratic Party was very instrumental in electing President Obama, a Democrat. Under Chairman Torres' leadership, the California Democratic Party has become stronger. We have Nancy Pelosi, the first woman Speaker of Congress. We have Senator Dianne Feinstein, the chairperson of the Senate Intelligence Committee. We have Senator Barbara Boxer, truly a champion of civil rights. Chairman Art Torres has just been appointed the Vice Chair of the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine. It's the state's stem cell agency created under Proposition 71. Senator Torres.
Thank you.
How are you, sir?
Good to be here.
Great. So anyway, this coming convention in April,
Our state convention, yes.
state convention, there will be a big celebration and a dinner in your honor.
Yes.
Unfortunately, it'll be you telling the California Democratic Party that it's been fun, but I'm moving on to bigger and better things. You've been selected as the vice chair for the Stem Cell Institute?
Yes, for the Independent Citizens Oversight
Awesome.
Committee.
Great. So please tell us about the Democratic Party.
Well, we have tremendous challenges ahead. We have initiatives on the ballot May 19th, which hope to balance the budget, but it looks like we're still going to be out of balance by $8 billion. And so we have to have these initiatives on May 19th to let people know that we need to save our educational system. We need to make sure that people have the necessary money for infrastructure projects, as well as the money that President Obama is sending us and the Congress. Speaker Pelosi, Senator Feinstein, Senator Boxer, and our California delegation have been working very, very hard, especially on ASU, George Miller, Mike Honda here in our Bay Area, Barbara Lee, Mike Thompson, Lynn Woolsey. They're all working very, very hard, and Jackie Spear working very hard for the Bay Area, as are other legislators from across the state, to make sure that these initiatives pass, number one, and number two, that California receives the economic stimulus money that we deserve.
Right. In this election, there's a few issues that will directly impact the Democrats for California. One of which is the open primary that Mr. Maldonado was able to negotiate during the budget proceedings in the state. Could you please tell us about this open primary?
Well, it really wasn't negotiation; it was extortion, and almost on the verge of being a crime. Trying to make sure that many Republicans who cannot win in their own primary feel that if we change the rules, maybe they can win. And that was the case with a number of moderate Republicans who cannot get the support of their own Republican voters because they're too conservative, the voters. So let's change the rules so that we can get on the ballot. Well, that's going to increase the cost in an open primary because let's take, for example, you and I are running for the same office, but we have to reach decline to state voters, Green Party voters, and Republican voters. That's going to take a lot more money than just trying to reach out to Democratic voters in our primary. And so if we win in the primary, we are two Democrats on the ballot, and there's no Green Party candidate, there's no Libertarian Party candidate, and there's no Republican candidate. I never thought I'd be supporting the Republican Party, but Republicans need a voice too. The Green Party needs a voice. Libertarians need a voice. The independent parties need a voice. Decline to state voters need a voice. This measure, the open primary, doesn't give them that.
So is this like a divide and conquer tactic on their part?
It's part of Republicans like Arnold Schwarzenegger, Abel Maldonado, and other moderate Republicans to try and figure out how they can win an election because they can't win in their own party.
Exactly.
If the governor was running for governor, I don't think he could have received the nomination of the Republican Party. He was only able to win because it was an open election for recall, which is very different
Right.
from a primary system. That doesn't mean that he's not a good candidate. It just means that he couldn't win in his own primary because right now 54% of Republicans, according to a report that will be issued at 10 p.m. tonight,
Right.
54% of Republicans do not support Arnold Schwarzenegger. And his approval rating is down now to 33%,
Right.
which is going to be difficult for us because he's supposed to be our main spokesperson to help us out
Right.
on the budget. I just hope people listen to what he has to say because it's going to have an impact on our budget to balance it.
Exactly. With regards to the open primary, what do you think in 2010 we have the governor's race? We have on the Republican side, perhaps Meg Whitman, Steve Poizner, and a few others. On the Democratic side, we have Lieutenant Governor John Gormandy, Mayor Villaraigosa, Attorney General Jerry Brown, and a few others. How do you think this open primary will impact this election?
Well, we have more Democrats in this state, so
Right.
you could end up having the top two vote getters, which could be two Democrats on the ballot. And no Republican, no Green Party, no Libertarian, because the
Right.
initiative says the top two candidates.
Right.
Well, the Republicans, I don't think they were thinking well about this when they passed it,
Interesting.
because at the end of the day, you're going to end up in California, at least, with very few Republicans in the top two spots, especially in this state,
Right.
when we're far ahead of the Republicans in voter registration.
Right, exactly. Well, also on the other side of this spectrum is the redistricting, right? That passed last year. So that comes when? 2011?
You have to have a census first, and
Right,
the next census is
2010,
next year, is 2010. And after that, this reapportionment commission,
Right.
which will be composed of Republicans and Democrats by the law, will determine the districts.
Right. And so how will that work hand in hand with this? Do you think there's a strategy on the part of the
Well,
Republican
the
Party?
Republicans think that a reapportionment district will give them more legislative seats.
Mm-hmm.
My argument to them is that's not very good to think about, because there are two elements that they don't think about. Number
Right.
one, the Republicans who say they don't want to increase taxes because there's too much government
Right.
now want to create a new commission,
Right.
which will cost millions of dollars to do what the courts are doing anyway.
Right.
So a reapportionment plan that can be put forward will always be reviewed by the California Supreme Court and the U.S.
Right.
Supreme Court. And that's why I think it was ridiculous because you can't create that many, quote, competitive districts
Right.
because there's so many rules. The Voting Rights Act, that requires not to split Filipino communities, Latino
Right.
communities, other Asian communities in two or three, so that you could never elect a member of one group or another.
Right.
That's not going to be permitted. So at the end of the day, it doesn't take much to create a reapportionment plan.
Right.
It could take two high schoolers with a good computer to come up with a plan, because the rules are so stringent,
Right.
which is why these districts are not going to produce competitive districts. And quite frankly, they have to be reviewed by the courts. But here we go, creating another new agency,
Right.
more cost to the taxpayers, and it's the Republicans' fault.
Right. Chairman, there's also what seems to be a move towards having a California constitutional convention. Where do you think this is coming from? And what do you think will be the impact of this move?
I think it's very dangerous to create a constitutional convention because there's so much left for mischief.
Right.
And I think people's rights will be at stake. And I think when you have a constitutional convention, you can change anything
Exactly.
in the Constitution. And that's what I fear the most, that there are so many rights that need to be protected.
Right.
And with these kinds of people voting, they wouldn't vote to protect them, even though the courts have protected these rights. So I would not be in favor of a constitutional convention. I would be in favor of changing
Right.
the majority vote requirement for a budget, Because right now there's only 6 states in the country, Nebraska and all these small states that have a 2/3 vote requirement, and California. It's ridiculous.
Right.
So there are efforts that to look at, well, how about just 55%
Right.
vote? I would be in favor of that, even though it's more than a majority.
Well, going back to the Constitutional Convention, who do you think was behind that?
Well, it's behind the Constitutional Convention, the Reapportionment Commission, the open primary, for the most part, has been the Republican Party.
Okay.
And so they want to make sure that they
Right.
have because they can't have an impact with the voters in a fair fight.
Right.
They want to change the rules to create unfair fights.
Exactly.
And so what happens here is instead they should go out into the districts like we do
Right.
and register new voters, and let's have a debate on which party is better for which community. And right now 71% of all Californians approve what
Right.
President Barack Obama is doing.
Exactly.
And I think
exactly.
that includes Republicans and declined to state voters and Green Party members within these polling. And that poll just came out a few weeks ago. So the president is doing great. Nancy Pelosi is getting much better marks as Congress, as
Exactly.
are our 2 U.S. senators,
Right.
Dianne Feinstein and Barbara Boxer. It's very important to keep those names in mind because they are working very hard for us at the federal level, as
Exactly.
well as I said, the other members of Congress from our congressional delegation, to make sure that California gets its fair share. And there are some Republicans that are helping too.
Exactly. Now, months, there are some serious debates, problems in the state legislature, lawsuits against Governor Schwarzenegger, counter lawsuits, and the feeling was it's because of this 2/3 vote that is required to pass a budget. Now, if we are in this majority rule in budgeting process, how would that problem have been alleviated?
We would have had a budget by June of last year
Exactly.
instead of January of this year.
Right.
When you allow 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 people to determine the vote on a budget,
Right.
and keep in mind, these are the same people that were screaming so loud against this
Right.
budget, but had their own pork projects for their districts in the budget,
Exactly.
and then didn't vote for it either.
Right.
And my position has been, if you have something in the budget, you need to vote for it. If not, take out that project out of your district and stop being such a hypocrite.
Right.
The same thing is true in the Congress. The very people like John McCain, who had millions of dollars come into Arizona for a Center for Justice Rehnquist in Arizona,
Exactly.
never talks about that when he screams about all the pork barrel in America. So we need to remove the hypocrites, both Democrats and Republicans, who say they're against pork barrel projects, yet they make sure that their projects are in the budget when they don't vote for it.
Right. Right.
We have 2 great United States senators
Right.
from California, and we should be very proud of them. Dianne Feinstein, chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee,
Exactly.
who has a powerful force in the Senate Judiciary Committee as well in terms of the impact on the appointment of judges.
Right.
She is a pivotal force for us in California and for this
Exactly.
country. And Barbara on the environment, and the fact that she's going to make sure that projects come to California,
Exactly.
infrastructure for our roads, our highways, to protect our environment.
Right.
She's been very strong in that area. And then our great partner, who is our Congresswoman,
Right.
my Congresswoman, I'm proud to say, here in San Francisco, is working even harder as a Speaker of the House, making sure that
Exactly.
California isn't forgotten, whether it's stem cell research, whether it's infrastructure projects, whether it's education. Nancy Pelosi has been phenomenal as a member of Congress,
Exactly.
but even more so as a speaker. She's going to leave once she decides to do whatever she wants to do next. I'm sure that's a far way off, but
Yeah.
she's going to leave a legacy that will make us all very, very proud.
Exactly. The state of California used to be the 5th largest economy in the world. Now it's down to the 8th, perhaps, largest economy in the world, with the 3rd highest unemployment in the country. What can the California Democratic Party do to help alleviate the economic crisis for Californians?
Reach 12% unemployment in California, and it's under a Republican governor, not a
Right.
Democrat. Number two, it's also important to support John Shung, our controller, and Bill
Right.
Lockyer, our treasurer.
Right.
Because Lockyer has done an incredible job just this week in billions of dollars in bonds to support the state of California
Right.
that investors are starting to buy now.
Okay.
And those of us in the Stem Cell Institute are also putting out bonds, and we're authorized to sell $400 million in bonds for research.
Okay.
That will help tremendously
Right.
the avenue. So things are starting to change in California. The retail sales of homes are starting to improve. It's not going to happen overnight, as the president has said. It's going
Right.
to take time. It's going to take effort. But there are signs ahead that because of his leadership, because of the leadership of our Democratic congressional delegation, things will be a little bit better in the next few months for California. And I just hope that we get a responsible Democratic governor in 2010, re-elect Barbara Boxer to the Senate to
Right.
make sure that we have the leadership that we need to carry us through, because
Right.
this recent sale of California bonds under the leadership of Bill Lockyer, our treasurer,
Right.
has been a real good surprise for all of us, and it's a good sign.
Great. What do you think are the biggest challenges that's facing the California Democratic Party today?
Nation, our economy,
Right.
and healthcare.
Great. Yeah.
And those are three very important issues that will always affect California because we're so big and we're so diverse. The economy means bringing in that economic stimulus to create jobs.
Right.
Because if you have jobs, people buy things.
Right. Right.
And when people buy things, they help little stores, big stores,
Exactly.
other communities, and it's a ripple effect
Exactly.
that has an impact. In terms of education, if we don't educate our workforce, our children, as the president said on Tuesday, we're going to be in serious trouble. So our educational system, to support our teachers, David
Right.
Sanchez, who's the president of the California Teachers Association, is working very hard to represent teachers. I come from a family of teachers. We don't
Right.
pay them enough. We'll never pay them enough for what they do for our children. But at the same time, we need to make sure that those classrooms are repaired.
Right.
Not new ones necessarily, just remodel some of the old ones that we need to bring up to speed. And then there comes the issue of health care.
Now, let's talk about former Assemblywoman Sheila Kuehl, the single-payer health care. What do you think of that? I've always liked that idea. I knew it was going to be difficult, and of course, Governor Schwarzenegger has vetoed it at least 3 times.
Every Republican governor has vetoed it.
Right.
In fact, I started it years ago when I was chairman of the Assembly Health Committee.
Oh, well, I didn't know that.
And then as chairman of the Senate Insurance Committee, it was a bill that John Garamendi, who was a great leader on this issue, and
Exactly.
I introduced, but it was vetoed by Deukmejian, by Wilson, and it never got anywhere. And so
Right.
people say, well, my goodness, we can't have a single payer. We already do. It's called Medicare. That's a single payer
Yeah.
system,
Right.
and it's helped seniors over 65 a lot. So don't
Right.
tell me we can't do a single payer government system. We already have it. It's called Medicare, and it's done
Exactly.
pretty well by our folks, and it was and signed into law by
Right.
Democratic President Lyndon Johnson in
Right,
1968.
Exactly. Now, how different is President Obama's concept of healthcare with Sheila Kuehl's concept of single-payer healthcare?
Well, the single payer healthcare is not Sheila Kuehl's or anybody else's.
Right.
It's a simple concept, and the president's trying to get close to that by making sure that creates a competitive market in the
Exactly.
healthcare delivery system, and also to loosen the strings of that drug companies place upon the pricing
Exactly.
of drugs, which is why everyone went to Canada to get cheaper drugs, the very same drugs that cost double, 3 times what they cost here in the United States. And so when President Bush signed this bill
Right.
to create a drug program for America under Medicare, there is a provision in that law which needs to be changed that says that the government can't negotiate on price.
Right.
So if you can't negotiate on price, you are held hostage by the drug companies to pay for whatever they ask for.
Right.
And that's just wrong. And that was the impact of the drug companies, not only here in California, but also at the federal level.
Great. Now, there is an initiative that has been proposed by Myrna to decriminalize marijuana and to tax it. What do you think of it?
Well, I think it's a good idea. In fact, I tried to do the same thing in 1975. Yes, because it's not a controversial issue. It's an issue that has to be, as long as you have the governing cycles of it. It's a way to raise money on a cash crop that's worth over $1 billion minimum here in California. We should also enforce it and decriminalize it and make it more readily available for medical patients, unlike what the federal government requires, number one.
Right.
Number two, the problem with that is that we can't write laws on our own because of all the treaties we have with foreign countries, as the United States of America has with other foreign countries that have been drug-producing countries where we are currently signatories to.
Right.
I don't see how that could be held constitutional unless those treaties are overturned as well.
Right. So how do you think the relationship would be? Let's assume that this initiative passes the state legislature, but we still have the federal laws to contend with. How do you think that relationship would be?
Well, it'll be challenged by the federal courts.
Oh. And ultimately, what do you think?
Well, I don't know. Depends on the judge. It depends on the court you get.
Exactly. Now, I've been actively involved with the Democratic Party since 1995.
Yes.
And you've been an incredible chairman.
Well, thank you.
When we talk about you, of course, with a lot of respect, we always say, "Oops, be quiet. There goes the chairman." And on the microphone, you go, "Shh," and everybody, like a bunch of school kids, suddenly is like, quiet.
That's right. It's my old teaching days.
Anyway, I know what your accomplishments are, but would you please tell us, like, what is your biggest accomplishment in your own perspective that you take pride in? What would
Well,
it
I
be?
think that we have more Democrats registered than ever before in California, ahead of Republicans. And we have Democratic leadership across the board. Darrell Steinberg in Sacramento, John Burton before him, Karen Bass, and clearly Willie Brown before her as a speaker. So when you look at all that's said and done, it's very, very difficult to do what we had to do in 1996. It was a very difficult year. People forget we had a Republican speaker in the Assembly. And because we won more seats, because we went out there and I organized a strategy with the help of President Clinton at the time, who was up for re-election, we were able to have enough Democrats to elect Cruz Bustamante, the first Latino speaker in the history of our state. And thereafter, Antonio Villaraigosa, Herb Wesson, African American, Fabian Nunez, another Latino, Karen Bass, the first African American woman. So since I took over the party, we have always had a Democratic speaker and a Democratic president pro tem, with Bill Lockyer, who was there in the Senate, who I served with, and after him, of course, John Burton, and then now, before him, after him, Don Parada, and now Darrell Steinberg, who I think is going to be an excellent president pro tem.
Exactly. Now, speaking of one downside or downfall that happened in the last few years, do you think the California Democratic Party, if you look back at the recall of Governor Davis, do you think that the party had made a mistake? If you look back at what the California Democratic Party, what would we have done differently? Could we have, based on what we know now, prevented that recall?
No, because I think that there was a movement afoot during that time in California history. It was 2003. You had a series of issues that created a perfect storm for Arnold Schwarzenegger, and a recall election that he could win, as opposed to a primary that he could never win in his own primary. And you had a very unpopular governor.
Exactly.
And so we worked very, very hard, and it was just not enough. And it was a very severe disappointment.
Exactly. Now, John Burton is excited about some people having John Burton as the new chair of the California Democratic Party.
I think John Burton will do a great job.
Yes.
He's going to be able to raise the money that we need to win legislative races. He knows what he's doing. He's been around the block a lot. And so no one's going to be able to fool him or take advantage of him. Tremendous respect among Democratic Party activists because of what he stands for and who he is and the principles that he's abided by. And I think that his leadership is going to be very, very necessary and important.
Exactly.
I'll always be there to help whenever I can if I'm asked. But at the same time, I think it's good that it's time to have a new leader. I've always felt involuntary term limits.
Okay.
When I left the Senate in 1994 to run for insurance commissioner, I wasn't forced out
Right.
because of term limits. I felt it was time to move on and do other things. And after 13 years, I thought it was just time for me to do other things. And I'm very grateful and honored that the board of the Stem Cell Institute was able to support me in this position.
Excellent. Governor Schwarzenegger, I've read that he is trying to put somebody else. What is this
No,
situation?
well, yes, the governor didn't want me on this board, and he did everything he could to prevent me from being on the board. But it was difficult for people to argue with my qualifications.
Exactly.
Not only as a chairman of a party, but people forget that I was chairman of the Health Committee,
Exactly.
and I was chairman of the Senate Insurance Committee, and the chairman of the Committee on Science and Technology.
Right.
And also, I'm a cancer survivor, a colon cancer survivor.
Exactly.
And so I think that as a patient advocate and with my qualifications, everybody thought from Diane to Barbara to
Right.
Nancy, even Ted Kennedy sent a beautiful letter
great.
to the board supporting me for this position. So it was kind of hard for the governor to defeat me. And, he had to do what he had to do. He's a Republican, I'm a Democrat.
Exactly.
But, stem cell research helps Republicans, Democrats, decline to state, Green, Libertarian, whatever party you're
Exactly.
from, that's who I'm going to work for because it's about people and getting them cured and well.
And of course, that is going to be the new thing for this century.
Yes, I think this is going to far exceed the research and discovery of DNA. I think it's
Exactly.
going to change the way people live and the length of their lives. And I think it's going to change the way people interact with their families, etc.
Exactly.
And I think that the first trials that we're going to have in spinal cord injury in June and other trials that will be coming up, but they won't happen unless we raise the money for it. And that's why we're trying to
Exactly.
sell these bonds to individual investors as well as institutions to help us raise the $400 million that we need, not from taxpayer dollars, but from investors to help this agency, which is a state agency,
Exactly.
provide the money for these necessary treatments and trials.
Great. Now, one last question. Do you think you'll ever run for office again?
Never.
Really? Is that a final?
That's a final.
Is that a final now?
That's a final no.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, and it's
and
always a pleasure to see you. And
I'm
very
sure-
proud of your leadership,
Thank you
especially
so
in our
much.
party. And I'm so happy that you're reaching out to the community as you do so well.
Thank you, Chairman Art Torres, for joining us tonight. And thank you again for joining us tonight. This is Myrna Lim, your host. Until next time, good night.